today I'm going to talk a little bit about where we see things going from a technology perspective, and I'll give you a little bit of an update on what we're doing from a portfolio where we're investing perspective. So let me just jump right into it. Now, when I joined Cisco, it was a year before we got the World Wide Web. And I remember in that year going to the Interop trade show and seeing Jim Clark, one of the co-founders of Netscape, seeing Jim demonstrating the web browser. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, that's kind of interesting, but not realizing how much it was about to change everything. And I want you to just think for a minute how much your lives have changed in the last 25 years because of one new technology. And today we're getting a whole new set of technologies that are allowing us to reinvent all over again. And it's when you reinvent and you make it so good that people say, I'm never going to do it the old way again. That's when you take 60% market share, right? That's when you're being disruptive. So where does it start? Well, it starts with the fact that we all have a supercomputer in our pocket. Obviously, this has already incited many changes for us already, but it goes well beyond this to the way that we interact with data. You know, if you think about it, we've gone from text to graphics to mobile devices, and now we're getting, the wearable, the augmented reality, we have vibration on our wrist, we have Siri talking in our ear. These are all new ways to interact with data, which are giving us the opportunity to reinvent. Then there's what's happening. Oh, by the way, this is, I was just up at SRI, Stanford Research, and I met with a couple of young CEOs there. This company is the CEO was a doctor, and here's the interesting thing about surgeons that do medical device implants. You know, the medical device makers, they come up with a new knee or a new pacemaker or whatever, and then what happens is the doctors go in for training. They bring them all back into headquarters, they do their training, they go back to the hospital, and 6 or 8 months later, they get the opportunity to do the first procedure. Let me tell you something, you do not want to be the first patient, right? Because 6 months or 8 months later, they've forgotten everything, right? So how do they refresh themselves? And this doctor that started this company told me this, they go to YouTube. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what they do, right? So he built this technology using VR that allows them to practice the procedure in their living room the night before the operation, right? And by the way, not only can they practice for themselves, they can practice with the other people that are going to be in the operating room with them, right? So just an interesting example of how we're starting to use the technology in new and interesting ways. Then there's what's happening with robotics. And when we think about robotics, we think about the robot putting the car door on, or we think about the vacuum running around the living room, right? Well, there's wearable robotics, right? This company, another young CEO that I got to meet there, is building technology that gives your muscles 30% extra strength. So this is targeted, the first generation is targeted at the aging population. People like myself are having trouble getting out of the chair, and it gives your muscles 30% extra strength. And if you've had a stroke, it has a little self-driving computer that's built into it. And if you've lost your balance, this will help you get your balance back and maybe eliminate the need for a cane. Right? And so what's interesting about this, besides the fact that it's just interesting, is that this is part of a continuing trend to not replace people with technology. We think about the automation that's happening in robotics and we're losing all these jobs, but we're also using technology to enhance people, right? And that's the flip side of that. And that's where the new jobs are going to come from, by the way, which is kind of an interesting topic all in itself. But this is enhancing your physical characteristics. This is making your brain bigger, right? You think about IBM Watson, it can read the medical library or the aircraft maintenance manual or the legal library, and then it can answer a question about anything that it just read, right? And these tools of big data, AI, machine learning, all of these tools are about essentially enhancing and making our brains bigger, right, to enhance our capability as humans, right? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then there's technologies like blockchain, and let's set aside currency for a minute. Cyber currency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and let's talk about blockchain from a data transfer perspective. Oftentimes, the entity that's in the position to collect the data is not the entity that's in the position to monetize the data. So for example, your car knows how you drive. Your insurance company would like that data. There's no secure, easy way to get the data from the car to the insurance company today, and blockchain is going to allow for that. Blockchain allows for very low cost microtransactions, right? And there are now companies, now in this case, there's a little company called Metromile, and they've built a new model for insurance, which is they only charge you when you're driving. And when you're driving safely, they charge you less. Now, they had to build their own Bluetooth dongle that plugs into the diagnostics port of the car to be able to do that, to collect the data. But the data was already there, right? So this is a technology that's going to help us to enable these new microtransactions. We're going to see more and more things moving to as a service. You know, today you buy a washer or dryer and you put it in your house. In the future, you're going to just press the button. Every time you press the button to do a load of laundry, it's going to charge you $7 or whatever, and it will include the soap and the maintenance and everything else, and you won't buy the machine, right? So blockchain is really allowing for these new kinds of models, plus a lot of other things. We could spend a whole hour talking about blockchain, but it's enabling in itself. All right, then there's the Internet of Things. We're at the pace right now, we're putting about 1 million things an hour onto the network. You realize that? About 1 million things an hour, right? And this is purely a function of Moore's law. So as the cost and the size and the power consumption continues to go down, we put sensors on more and more things. This is something I've been talking about for years. But you know, today, we don't put a sensor on your water glass to tell the waiter when to refill it. But when it costs a penny, we will. And it's going to cost a penny. We're not that far from that, right? So this is purely a function of the fact that all of these things are producing data, and there's insights, and there's value in that data. And at some price point, that becomes true for almost anything. So we're going to put sensors on everything. And by the way, it's not just the hyperconnectivity of the things, by the way. It's also the hyperconnectivity of people. You realize there's still half the world's population that does not have an internet connection, right? About 4 billion people. There are a number of efforts underway right now to connect these 4 billion people. This is Richard Branson's team called OneWeb. They're putting up these new low Earth orbit microsatellites. Low Earth orbit is important because they're low latency. They're only about 35 miles out in space. So they're about the same as terrestrial fiber from a latency perspective. They're super high bandwidth. They're putting 700 up to blanket the Earth. You also have Spacex moving into this market. They've been aggressive here. They're planning on a 4,000 satellite constellation. You have Boeing moving into this market. They just came to visit us at headquarters in San Jose. They've been very, very quiet, but they're moving very rapidly. And then there are other folks like O3b. This is mid-Earth orbit steerable beam technology. Every beam width adds another channel of bandwidth, right? So it's another alternative to this. And by the way, I counted at least 12 companies that are working on these new satellite systems, right? So there's plenty of competition here. Not all these will succeed. You know, some will fail, some will succeed, right? And then you have the folks that have said, you know, satellites are too expensive. The reason those 4 billion people aren't connected is because they can't afford the connection, right? So this is internet.org. This is Mark Zuckerberg's nonprofit. And they've said, we're going to reinvent. We're going to rethink this problem because we can't afford to do it with satellites. So they've built this flying wing called Aquila. And this is an autonomous solar-powered flying wing. And they send it up to 60,000 feet, and it circles. It stays on station for about 2 months at a time before they bring it back in and replace it with another one, right? And then they put a 5G antenna on it, right? So this is a lower cost alternative than launching a satellite. This effort's going on. And then you have, of course, Google launching balloons. And you know, what's important here, again, is not any one of these. What's important is all of them. Because in the next 5 years, we're going to connect another 4 billion people to the network. Right? And that's not only 4 billion new customers, it's 4 billion new students, 4 billion new workers. Maybe most importantly, it's 4 billion new inventors. Right? We're about to tap into half the brain power of this planet. I think when we look back 20 years from now and we say, what was the coolest technology? We're not going to be talking about the Oculus Rift, right? We're going to be talking about this, right? Because this is significant. It's also, by the way, unfortunately, it's also 4 billion new hackers, right? So we have to take the good with the bad, right? And then there's the venture capital spend, and we're at an all-time high right now in terms of the amount of venture capital being invested into new technology startups, right? And the reason for this is when a company like Uber comes along and takes away half the taxi business, there's a lot of wealth changing hands. And so we see the money is following the money. So we're in a really interesting inflection point from a technology perspective in time, right? And it's being driven by all of these new technologies, which, by the way, are not going to slow down, right? Technology is on the exponential curve. Moore's law is an exponential curve. It's not going to slow down. They're only going to come at us faster, right? And it's a combination of all these new technologies along with a level of connectivity that we have never seen before, along with a level of funding that we've never seen before. And that's really what's driving this discussion of, going digital, which, by the way, is not a new, it's just a new name for how technology and business come together. It's really not a new phenomenon, but it's the latest buzzword, right? Now, we've been studying the disruption and what's happening with digitization. We formed a think tank with a business school in Switzerland called IMD. And they've been working on academic research to study this. And I want to share a couple of the data points with you from the original research work that was done about 3 years ago. They asked questions of about 1,000 business leaders around the globe, cross industry, cross geography. They asked them questions like this. They said, in your industry, how many companies or organizations that are in a top 10 position today do you believe will be moved out of the top 10 due to digital disruption over the next 5 years? And on average, they said 4 out of 10. If this data is accurate, which I think it is, 4 out of 10 of the top players in every industry and every geography will change over the next 5 years. And even more disturbing than this was when they asked, does your organization have a strategy and are you executing on it? And only 25% said they were, right? And I think, honestly, this is a people change thing, right? This has nothing to do with the technology. It's hard. It's hard to change, right? But it has to happen, right? Because otherwise we see the disruption that goes along with this. Now, like I said, this data is about 3 years old. It was recently refreshed. I want to share the current data with you. So back in November. So just to give you a sense for the trends and how fast this is moving, right? All right. So what I want to do now is move on to the recurring themes in how technology is being applied. If you understand the core capability, you can then be the inventor of the next way of doing it, right? And I'm going to give you a lot of use cases, and you could just look at the use case and say, I'm going to follow and I'm going to do that. But you know what? The reality is, if you're just doing what everybody else is doing, you're not creating any differentiation, right? And you really want to put yourself in the position to be the inventor of the next way of doing it, right? So what are folks doing? Well, here's theme number one. With technology, we can simplify, right? And we know we love that simple experience. We love it when we press one button to get the Uber car or the Lyft car, right? We love that. Put your phone away, you're done. And if we can make it one button simple to get an Uber car, we ought to be able to make it one button simple to get a mortgage, right? Bank already has all my data. Why do I have to fill out 17 forms? When I check into the hospital, why do I have to have a clipboard and spend a half an hour answering questions? I mean, this stuff should be well behind us, right? Technology is very good at hiding complexity, right? At the Starwood hotels, they're checking you in automatically. They use the location services from our wireless access points, which can do 1 meter accuracy on any Wi-Fi device, right? So when you have the Starwood app on your phone and you walk into one of the hotels where they've implemented this, they know you're in the lobby. They check you in. They put your room key on the near-field communications on the device so you can swipe it when you get to the door, and now you don't have to go to the front desk. They put turn-by-turn directions, indoor turn-by-turn directions, and all of a sudden, they've made it really simple, right? So these are just a couple examples of how we can use technology to hide complexity. This is the Amazon Dash button, right? You put this, it's a little Wi-Fi transmitter, you stick it on your washing machine, and when you're running out of soap, you press the button, right? The soap shows up at your house later that day. Now, once you've pressed that button, you ever going to go back to Costco and carry the soap home again? Probably not, right? So these are just a few examples. All right, so that's theme number one. Theme number two is around optimization. And there's at least 50% waste in everything. Whether it's energy consumption, whether it's asset utilization. We order too much inventory. We don't order enough inventory. We make people stand in line too long. There's all the room, lots of room for optimization. And by the way, these optimization efforts often pay for other innovations, right? When we can optimize and take out cost, we can then pay for the new innovation, right? And it becomes because of the data, right? The data is the raw material for these new business models. When we can measure things, we can analyze, and when we can analyze, we can optimize. So, what are we measuring? Well, there's a parking sensor, right? Keeps track, is there a car parked in the spot? Optimizing parking. Here's a smart wireless pill bottle, keeps track, did you take your medicine? When did you take it? How many did you take, right? Optimize your health care. This is called moo call. This straps onto the cow's tail and runs analytics on the tail movements of the cow, which change when she's about to have a baby, about an hour before. And it notifies the farmer so they can go assist with the birth of the cow. Right? I told you we're going to put a sensor on everything. It includes the cow's tail, right? Right? We already talked about, auto insurance, but there are a lot of examples where the data is already being collected. We're just not tapping into it, right? So, this is, the insurance example is a great one here where they've just taken advantage of the data that's already being collected by sensors, thousands of sensors that are in your car. Your car has 100 processors in it these days, right? Doing things with this data. This is the wine growers. They're putting sensors on the wine vines. They measure the fluid moving through the vine. They measure the soil moisture and temperature and pH, and then they precision water the grapes. This allows them to adjust the sweetness and the sourness and the astringency of the wine. They're creating award-winning wines every year, right? Because they have the data, right? And we can analyze it and we can change the outcome. This is a company called Propeller Health. They make an asthma inhaler. This is similar to the medicine bottle in that it tracks your medicine usage. But they added a twist. They put a GPS chip into the device. So when you take your medicine, it drops a pin on the map. And you can start to see when you go to the rose garden, it's causing you to have an asthma attack or whatever it is, right? Well, this is interesting all by itself. But in the port city of Barcelona, they took the data from people's asthma inhalers. They combined it with the data that showed what the ships were unloading. In this case, it happened to be soybeans. The dust from soybeans is an asthma antagonist. And they combine that with the weather data, and they can now see a plume of soy dust downwind from the ships unloading the soybeans, right? Now they text message the patients, tell them to close their windows for 2 hours while they unload the soybeans, right? But it's a great example of what happens when you start to bring together data from different vectors. You can start to get pictures of things that you could never have seen before, right? This is giving us visibility. It's the insights in the data that we're interested in. This is why, so many folks are using these tools like Tableau, right? Because they allow you to visualize, to get insights from the data. Now, here's the challenge. Today, the way we do this is we create a beautiful infographic with the tools, and then we put it on a PowerPoint slide, and we bring it to a meeting, right? In the future, the next step of this is let's take those insights and let's give them to people in real time at the point of work when it's really valuable to have that real-time data. And I think that's going to be one of the next phases of computing. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Manufacturing, process control. There are billions of sensors in place. These are all moving on to the TCP/IP network right now, right? So this is a whole new set of data for us. When we connect to your assembly line, we can make it run 30% faster, right? We can make sure it's zero downtime, right? Video as a sensor. We don't think about video as a sensor, but we can count people, we can count things, we can determine age plus or minus 5 years with current algorithms. We can determine gender with about 85% accuracy, right? So it's a whole new set of data for us to measure and analyze and then use to optimize. All right, the last core capability I want to talk about is an important one, and it's important not only because of business productivity, but it's important because this is where the new jobs are going to come from, right? As we continue to automate things and eliminate the need for people and get more efficient, which will happen no matter what we do, right? We also have to be thinking, well, where do the next jobs come from, right? And this is where technology, I think, is going to come in and play a really important role. In the beginning, I talked about how we've been moving from text to graphics to mobile, and now we're getting all these new kinds of wearable, technologies, right? These are allowing us to give people information anywhere, anytime, and in context, right? Now, and by the way, the picture in the green, that's what, virtual reality, augmented reality looks like today. You got to put all this headgear on. Moore's law is telling us we're not very far from the picture on the right, that contact lens, right? Google's already working on the contact lens. Intel has just released their new, attempt to add glasses, right? They removed the glass hole problem by taking the camera off of it, right? So doesn't have the same privacy concerns. It does do head tracking though, right? So that head tracking allows you to determine head position, right? So what gets interesting here, and by the way, on the right-hand side, you see that little plastic, that's a low-power laser, and it bounces the light off the glass and puts a display on the back of your retina, right? So this gives everybody a heads-up display. These technologies are going to allow us to give people data in real time. And take that head tracking data, combine it with the location data that we get, for example, from the wireless, and then combine that with the insights that we get from analyzing the data, and we get what I call dynamic contextual computing, right? I think this is going to be one of the next waves of computing, which is mixing the new user experience, AI technologies, other analysis capabilities, and bringing it all together in very interesting ways. And so while most of us learned about augmented reality from this silly time-wasting game, anybody else waste any time besides me? Yeah, I see a few hands, right? Thank you for being honest. There are real examples of giving people more data at the point of work, like giving the doctor more data about the patient while they're operating on the patient, right? How about if we could put legal precedent into the lawyer's glasses while she's cross-examining the witness? How about if we could put the customer's name in that banker's glasses so that she's got a virtual name tag on her so he can call her by name, and it also lets him know that her mortgage needs to be refinanced next month, right? This is how we start to use the technology in really interesting new ways. And this is not about replacing people, this is about augmenting our human capabilities. With our eyes, we can't see the wind, but with this app, you hold it up, you can see the wind, right? I don't know if you've tried Google Translate, but you hold your phone up and you read the sign in your language. We just gave you 29 languages in your pocket, right? This is enhancing our human skills, allowing us to move to the next work, to higher value work. We can make the security guard safer by pointing out the dangerous things that they should be paying attention to. We can make the insurance claims adjuster faster and more accurate by giving them data about the vehicle while they're working on that vehicle. Or we can take the plant technician and we can guide them step by step through the process of fixing something that they've never been trained on before and maybe that they've never worked on before, right? And remember when we talked about that 4 billion people that we're about to add to the network, right? Most of those people are not going to get 20 years of education, right? These technologies are going to allow us to make those people productive and create jobs for those people as well. How about showing the miner where to dig, This is a real app. How about if we could show the soldier where they shouldn't step? We might even be able to make your golf game better. I'm afraid mine is a little too far gone. It doesn't matter. Clubs, apps, doesn't help, I'm afraid. Yeah, exactly. Right. And by the way, we're not going to just do it at the front line. We're going to do it in the boardroom too, right? This is SAP's digital boardroom product, which gives you that real-time data and analytics, for your most expensive, probably most important minds, right? And this is an example where we're using context. This is Cisco's visual dashboard for the call center agent. So what this is showing the call center agent is who they're talking to. That little colored tape across the top is what were they doing on your website before they called in with a problem. Are they a good customer? Are they an average customer, right? What's their chat history, their call history? Have they been trying to solve a problem? Are they upset? Are they happy? What's their sentiment? This is all data that we give to the call center agent as additional data and context to help them do their job. And this gets even more interesting when we start plugging in these new tools of AI and machine learning and natural language processing, et cetera, right? Because we now are essentially giving you access to the entire library. We're making your brain cells, your memory cells much, much bigger, right? And that's what's happening here. All right, so that's kind of the state of digitization, at least as I'm seeing it. I get to host a lot of our customers at headquarters in San Jose. So I spent a lot of time with CIOs. This last year, I spent time with about 250 different companies. So that's kind of where this is coming from, my perspective is coming from. So what I want to do is just spend a minute before I wrap up on, on what Cisco's role is in this, right? Because, we don't make the goggles, we make the platform, right? We make the parts of this that allow you to put it together. And so if you look at where we've been investing, and by the way, when I talk about our investments, I'm not only talking about the engineering investment. So we have 19,000 engineers. We spend $6.3 billion a year in R&D. But we also acquire a lot of companies, right? Over 200 in the last 20 years. And we also are an active venture capitalist, investing into new startup technologies in areas that are adjacent or just areas that we want to learn a little bit more about. So when I talk about our investments, I'm actually talking about all of those activities. So where's our number one investment area been? Number one is security, right? If we can't get the security right, we can't do any of these things, right? And as these technologies become more important daily in our lives, I gave this talk recently to a group of farmers out in the Central Valley of California where they grow much of the produce for the United States. These guys all showed up in their Gulfstream jets. I was like, wow, it's good to be a farmer. Anyway, but I got done with my talk, and the very first question was, what do I do when the ransomware guys shut off my water? Right? If you think about it, security is just its job number one here. So this has been our number one investment area. If you follow that closely, you'll see the next investment area is around automation and visibility, right? And when I say automation and visibility, I'm talking about automation, the software-defined controllers that are allowing us to deploy IT in new and faster ways, along with the visibility that analytics from telemetry data coming from the infrastructure give us to inform these new algorithms, right? And so if you look at automation and visibility across our entire portfolio, it's based on this concept of intent-based networking, right? Which is new for us. We launched this about a year ago, and we talk about it being powered by intent. Intent is policy, right? And driven by context. Context is the telemetry or the visibility. Right? And so in an intent-based environment, there's no more box-by-box configuration. Today, if we want to change an access list or write a new policy that goes across the network, we have to log into every box. And usually you've got an engineer with a Visio diagram and a spreadsheet, and they're doing cut and paste out of Notepad, and they go from box to box to box and change the configurations, right? Now, we do two simple things. One, we manage identity. Right? So we have something called the Identity Services Engine, which allows you to identify things and classify them. These are the cash registers, these are the thermostats, these are the doctors, these are the medical devices, right? And then we write rules, and we say the thermostats are not allowed to talk to the cash registers. And then the software-defined controller goes and implements those sticky rules across every box and every location, and it does it nearly instantly, right? So changes that might have taken weeks in the past now take seconds, right? So what does this look like in our portfolio today? Well, we've been working on automation and visibility in all areas of the portfolio, starting in the data center with our ACI controller for compute network storage in the data center, and then now complemented by something called Tetration Analytics, which is like NetFlow on steroids. It gives you visibility to everything that's happening, all of the flows of traffic in your data center. And at the WAN and Access, our DNA Center with a new capability called Assurance, which is the telemetry. That's the visibility piece. At the Cloud Edge, we have a new product called Secure Agile Exchange. It gives you software-defined interconnect in the cloud, literally physically in the cloud. We put a rack at the colo for you, and this gives you now software-defined configurability at the Cloud Edge, along with some other tools there. At the IoT layer, we acquired a company called Jasper Wireless. You know, when every water glass is part of the network and you've got millions of things to add per hour, you can't do that with, you know, an engineer configuring every device manually, right? So when a GM car rolls off the assembly line, or a Mercedes for that matter, the very first thing that happens when they plug the battery in is that car calls home and it talks to Jasper, and Jasper enrolls that vehicle as a new endpoint on the maintenance network, right? So it's all done through automation. And our Kinetic platform is the automation and visibility tools of dealing with special things in IoT like fog computing, like streaming databases, other things there. So that's our portfolio at the IoT layer. And then more recently, we acquired this company called AppDynamics, not just because we wanted to get into the application performance monitoring business, but because it extends the telemetry and the visibility that we get in the network infrastructure, it extends it all the way up into the application. And so now we have a portfolio that gives us visibility from the sensor to the software. And when something is not optimal in that path, anywhere in that path, we can now fix it, or at least identify it very quickly. And we're starting to connect through algorithms, the telemetry back into the software-defined controllers in a closed-loop fashion. I recently got to spend some time out in Research Triangle Park at where our telephone support center for the US is. And they sat me down with this young man right out of school who had been on the job for a year and a half or so. And I was really impressed. I was like, this kid is brilliant. Because the customer would call in, they'd start explaining a problem, and within 3 sentences, he'd look over at me and he'd kind of wink, telling me, you know, I know what their problem is, I can fix this, right? I'm like, wow, he's brilliant. But then I realized, you know what? He's had that question 20 times before. We're taking that knowledge and we're now encoding it into algorithms that allow us to take the telemetry from the infrastructure, identify a problem, and then make a change in configuration that potentially fixes that problem. This is Cisco's version of the self-driving car, right? And you know, one of the challenges that every CIO has is the average CIO is spending 90% of their budget just keeping the lights on, leaving a mere 10% left for innovation. If you've only got 10% left to innovate, not likely you're going to do a whole lot of innovation, right? So this is why we've been investing so heavily in automation and visibility and the closed loop nature of that to put this all together. We also use it along with the value that we get from our security systems. So Talos is our security operations center. And Talos is essentially a giant machine learning cluster that is taking telemetry from installed Cisco networks around the world and correlating it in such a way to find the new threats. The amount of telemetry data that it ingests on a daily basis is about 6 times the amount of traffic as Google search sees on a daily basis, just to give you a sense of how much data we're looking at. The output of that is condensed and goes into a team of about 350 of the world's top network security data scientists. And those people are looking for the really bad stuff. Their average time to detect a new threat at Talos, so this is any new virus, malware, spam, phishing attack, any of these things, their average time to detect is down to under 4 hours now. When any new threat breaks out anywhere in the world, we know about it within 4 hours. And we turn that data around and send it back to you in the form of a new firewall rule, a new DNS block, a new IPS rule, for example, that helps you to protect yourselves. And just to give you a sense, when the WannaCry virus hit earlier this year, there was not a single customer that was infected by WannaCry because they were protected. And some of those protections come through automation today. You're going to see more of that. Now that we have these software-defined controllers across the infrastructure, we can start using them in more creative ways. So for example, let's assume that a new threat dictates that you change the way that you've segmented your network. Well, what if we could do that all through automation? And it just happens automatically. And you don't have to worry, did someone remember to patch the server or whatever, right? So this is the direction that we've been going with automation, visibility, and security. And then we've also been continuing to invest heavily from a collaboration perspective because we believe it's important that your data architecture and your collaboration architectures be tightly aligned. You know, as we start to incorporate these new capabilities like machine learning and bots and these kinds of things, you've got your data architecture and your collaboration architecture must be aligned. The reason we're collecting all this data is so we can give it to people so they can make great decisions. Oftentimes they need to talk to someone, and that's the collaboration part. And we're going to see more integration there as well. And one last bonus slide. I want to just spend 1 second on this because I think this is something that's quite interesting as it relates to building these new context-aware applications. Because many of our security technologies have come through acquisition, our engineers built a set of open APIs that allows those products to share context with each other. So this thing is called PX Grid. And it's open, it's available on Cisco DevNet, open to anyone that wants to tap into it. Well, here's the interesting thing. We built this for security. We didn't build this for contextual computing. But guess what? The same context that we use for security can be used to give you context about what's happening in your infrastructure. So PX Grid knows who you are because of identity. PX Grid knows what device you're logged in on. Is Jim on the glasses? Is Jim on an iPad? Is Jim on a PC? Right? PX Grid knows what you're doing in the environment. And as we start to tap into the power of data from AppDynamics, we can also tell that Jim is in an application trying to check his balance, or Jim is trying to place an order, right? This is additional context that we can give. So these tools that allow you to start building these next generation contextual computing applications so that we can now do dynamic computing based on context gets very interesting here, right? And it's available off the shelf, right, from Cisco's DevNet. Thank you for your time today. We very much appreciate the opportunity to earn your business. If you're already a customer, thank you for that business. If you're a potential customer, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today and talk a little bit about what we're doing with technology. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah.